The Ink and Paint Club podcast is intended for mature audiences. I know we're usually talking about kids' cartoons and stuff, but there's going to be naughty language. Anyway, listener discretion is advised.
You're listening to the Ink and Paint Club podcast, your weekly home for animation reviews and discussions.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Ink and Paint Club podcast.
Hello.
It's me, I'm your host JD, and with me is my wife Melanie.
Also host.
Yeah.
Hostess.
Sure.
Hostess with the mostest.
Yeah, there you go. We were going to do this review a couple weeks ago when we actually saw this movie, but Melanie was a little under weather at the time. Yeah, it was awful. You should have seen it. But yeah, so we're finally going to talk about the movie Loving Vincent.
Yay!
A movie that's been in development for God knows how long.
Long ass time, like 10 years.
I don't know if it's that long, but
Really? Oh, I thought it was.
might have been like 5 or 6.
Well, let's check the facts.
I don't know. But anyway. So yeah, Loving Vincent finally came out this year, and if it's something you're not familiar with, it's basically the world's first oil-painted film.
Mm-hmm. Like all completely hand-painted.
Yeah,
The whole film.
so I mean, like back in the day, they would like hand paint like animation cells and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but like no, like every frame of this entire movie is like.
See, I guess that's where I didn't understand, because yeah, like Snow White, you could say was all hand-painted.
Well, I mean, they're painting on little cells, but these ones are like, you know,
Like an actual
full-size
canvas painting?
oil paintings.
Okay.
So I guess in that sense, or in the sense where you can see like every brushstroke, but we'll get into that in a minute. But yeah, so basically this movie revolves around a year after Vincent Van Gogh's death, who I'm sure many of you know is a very famous painter nowadays.
Yeah, so Vincent Van Gogh, famous Dutch painter, who, and if you don't know, we won't hate you, but he did like Starry Night and the famous sunflowers. He had a very, the way he died is a very contemplative,
Controversial, I mean?
controversial
I mean, you could contemplate it, I guess.
fact, yeah, that's many people have disputed for in history for a long time. And it, for a very, almost ever people just were like, oh, he just committed suicide. That was just kind of the thing, because he was a pretty kooky guy. He had a lot of mental problems. And people just were like, yeah, it makes sense that he would kill himself.
Yeah.
But then there's all kinds of facts that lead to more of accident or a murder than a straight up suicide. How Van Gogh died was he was shot in the stomach and over
In a field.
in the middle of a field, like a mile away from town. And he walked back with the bullet wound. He walked back to town and went to his room, and he died over the course of like 2 days.
Yeah.
It was a slow death, I'm sure very painful.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people were like, that's really weird. If you were going to kill yourself, why would you shoot yourself in the stomach? It's a very weird place to be.
Yeah, why would you shoot yourself, then walk all the way back to town?
Yeah, walk all the way back to town. If you wanted... So my perspective on it is usually people who want to commit suicide are people who they don't want to be alive anymore, meaning they don't want to suffer, they just want to die. People who commit suicide don't want to feel pain, they just want it to be over. They don't want to suffer, because the suffering is scary and uncomfortable, obviously.
Right.
So, that's why a lot of people hang themselves, or if they shoot themselves, it's in the head. Sorry, this is a very gruesome...
Or at least in the heart or something.
Yeah, this review got pretty gruesome. Anyway, so that's where a lot of people were like, why, if you're killing yourself, would it be in the stomach? And then there's even a part in the movie where they visit, like, the doctor who examined him, and the doctor said that the angle that the bullet went...
Yeah, I like that whole scene.
Yeah.
Because basically, this movie revolves around the postmaster of the town where Vincent lived, got this letter that Vincent wrote to his brother. So Vincent Van Gogh wrote thousands and thousands and thousands of letters to his brother Theo. There's a book you can get on that.
Yeah, there's a whole book that you can call Dear Theo, about all the letters Van Gogh wrote to his brother, because Theo was Van Gogh's brother and, like, his best friend. So the postmaster, which I guess was a really big job in that day, was the person who delivered all the letters. So he was on good terms with Vincent and his brother Theo. So in the movie, they discover this long-lost letter a year later, and they're like, oh my gosh, we have to get this letter to Theo. So the postmaster gets his son,
who's kind of an
angsty douche.
Yeah, he's kind of a screw up. He gets in fights.
Yeah, he's just angsty.
Yeah. So
he's like, hey, I need you to take this letter to Theo. And it's so funny because the guy who played the postmaster is Chris O'Dowd. Chris O'Dowd.
Who you probably know from, like, Bridesmaids. He's been in a couple things.
I didn't, like, realize he was in that movie, so that was really cool.
There's a few, like, name people, like, there's that one guy from
Jerome Flynn is the guy from Game of Thrones.
And then, I know the name Saoirse Ronan. I don't know what she's been in.
Let's see. Let's Google. I'm on Google right now. Anyway,
But it was just interesting, basically, watching this postmaster's son go from person to person, like, people who knew Van Gogh in his life, and like slowly try to piece together like why Vincent would have wanted to kill himself.
So it's this big mystery. So the son starts off as like really angry, and he's like, I don't want anything to do with it. And then you kind of like slowly learn that, okay, well maybe the son was more of a friend to Vincent than he's letting on. Mm-hmm. Because as the movie goes on, the guy gets more emotional about it and more curious about it.
I mean, basically after talking to a few people, he basically takes it upon himself to like, okay, I'm going to actually figure out why he died or how he died.
I think at first he's just like, no, I don't want anything to do with this. You know, the situation sucks. And then he's just like, all right, this was my friend. So the guy was a painting. They said in the movie that this character himself, Van Gogh, painted.
Well, that's the thing. Like I actually think all of the characters that appear in this movie were, because basically there's
a Van Gogh painting.
Like pretty much every set in this movie is a reference to some Van Gogh painting. Well, I'm personally not familiar with the entire breadth of Van Gogh's, paintings. There's a few in there that I recognized, and it's actually kind of nice because during the end credits they put the actors next to the
so that was really fun when we got to watch the movie. It was kind of like a hide and seek as to where
it's like what's this a reference to,
which ones was he like, oh that scenery is this painting, and blah blah blah, and so that was really fun. And it's very clever how they built a story, completely fictional, how they built this story and this world based off of just the Van Gogh paintings. I thought that was very interesting. They built and
I mean, I'm sure a lot of the subjects of his paintings were real people, but the story itself is fictional.
I mean, who knows? Maybe people did search. I don't know.
I don't know. But no, it was. I mean, it's an interesting little murder mystery kind of a story. And. I mean, we'll get into it. I'm sure we'll get into more, but when they say this is a completely oil painted film, you see it.
Yeah.
I mean, screw it. Let's get into it now. I mean, this if the story isn't what hooks you on this, I mean, the visuals definitely will. And if this doesn't get some kind of a nod at the Oscars, I'll be real disappointed.
It'll be insane if it doesn't. So. I wasn't really sure. I didn't know what the story was about, and I wasn't really sure. I was like, I don't really care if the story's that great because it's visually stunning. But the story was pretty good.
Yeah.
I got pretty into it. And so, wasn't it, like, rotoscoped?
Yeah, so basically, what my understanding of how this movie was constructed is that they filmed all the actors doing their things, then they composited, like, over a green screen. And they composited all the actors onto the sets, and then they combined that, and the painters would basically use that thing as reference and then paint that.
So that's pretty incredible, because then you have to not only pay the filming and the actors, then you got to pay all the painters.
Yeah, and they had like over 100 painters who could paint in Van Gogh's style.
Yeah, they were like specifically masters of.
And I think
that's so interesting.
What?
They quote unquote are masters of the Vincent Van Gogh art style. I think that's so funny though, how Vincent would just bust out paintings like 3 a day, like so quickly. so quickly without even thinking about it and without even going to school or learning about art. And then there's these people who have to master his art style.
Well, I mean, that was even kind of a point in the movie where the doctor that was treating him was basically saying that, like,
that was
he could bang out a painting in an hour, what would take him a lifetime to do.
Yeah, so that was interesting. So when I was watching this movie, I had a hard time following the story because I was so distracted by the visuals.
Yeah, I think this movie is going to take a few times to completely get everything.
I would love to go see it again. Like, when it comes out,
I think it's still at the Gateway.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so I'll definitely rewatch it. But yeah, I mean, it's so distracting just because the visuals are, oh my god, like, you just sit and it'll just be showing someone's face, but every frame, like, the cheeks are moving. And you could see,
like, the depth of the brushstrokes and everything.
Insane.
And it's really interesting.
Yeah.
There's a lot of shots where it's like there's very subtle movement. You can actually see like the paint smears where they just like made subtle changes.
Yeah, and then then when they're showing like lamps or something, you know, they actually show the glow strokes.
Right,
is really awesome, and just the mastery of the colors. I mean, you'd have to be a master of colors.
Yeah.
I mean, my God.
I mean, Van Gogh had a pretty firm grasp on that, so, I mean, having people who can know his style that.
Yeah, it is just incredible. At some point, I forgot I was, like, watching, you know, it really did look like something Van Gogh made. So, what was interesting was Van Gogh himself was hardly in the movie.
Yeah, you don't see him that often. It's mostly following this postmaster's son and him interviewing all these people who were in Vincent's life, so you had, like, the guy who sold him paints, or the girl that he was supposedly in love with, or the girl who ran the hotel he stayed in, or his doctor.
So that was interesting. So the name of the guy who the story basically follows is Armand...
Oh, that's right, Armand.
Armand Rollin.
That guy.
So, and it says Vincent painted Armand 3 times.
Yeah.
So, and so what was interesting to me is there was actually a part in the movie where, I think it was the innkeeper girl. She was like, "Oh, so he painted you too, huh?" So it was kind of like all these people had a connection, a very intimate connection with Van Gogh.
Yeah,
and they made it seem like it was this very intimate thing that they all had in common. And whether some people saw it as a positive and some people saw it as a negative, it was very interesting.
Yeah, because it's really interesting to see how everyone reacted to Van Gogh, because you've got, you know, the innkeeper girl and the postmaster who are very kind on him. And I mean, I love the whole scene at the beginning where the postmaster's getting mad at the people in the cafe.
I love that. That gets me
where he's basically blaming everyone's like, you guys are the reason he killed himself.
Yeah, they're like a whole town against a poor sick man, which at the end of the day is the truth. Vincent Van Gogh was very ill. And, I mean, obviously no one was there. We don't know Van Gogh. But, I mean, you know, you read all kinds of things on Van Gogh himself where he had a short temper, he drank, you know, he was probably schizophrenic. Like, he
probably had a plethora of mental illnesses.
He was just a mess. Like, this was not a healthy man. He was very sick. And I think, in the 1800s when he was alive, I mean, yeah.
They didn't have diagnosis for that
people
stuff.
Don't know what the...
They just assumed you were crazy.
Yeah, he's just a town crazy guy.
Yeah, we didn't know what schizophrenia and stuff was back then.
So, yeah, and he never sold... In his lifetime, he only ever sold 1 painting. So what I loved was, at the end of the film, towards the end of the film, where Armand is riding on this carriage out of town, they show the 1 painting that Van Gogh sold. You know, obviously it was the scenery. But
which one was the?
It was like these people working in the field. And it was like kind of a reddish tone.
Oh, okay.
That's the only painting Van Gogh has ever sold. So it was cool how they paid homage to that. And I mean, Van Gogh was so poor; he had no money. He used to try to trade his paintings.
Well, I mean, and they show that during the thing because it's basically saying that his brother Theo paid for everything.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like he wouldn't have been able to paint her if his brother wasn't giving him supplies.
Yeah, Theo, like, oh my god. Theo was one hell of a brother.
Yeah.
And, so it's just all kind of all over the place. And so anytime they showed Vincent, it was black and white.
Well, okay, and that's what I thought was interesting. So, the entire, like, what for the movie would be present day is all in color, and in Van Gogh's style. But anytime they have a flashback, it goes to black and white, and it becomes more like realistic rotoscope.
I would be watching the black and white part, and I was like, "Oh my, this looks real." Like I got confused at some point.
Yeah, I mean, but there's pieces where you can definitely tell it's still painted, but it's interesting that's the choice they went to kind of differentiate like present day to flashbacks.
I agree.
To make everything black and white like that.
Yeah, so I mean that helped. I wouldn't have known otherwise which parts were, present day or not. But so anyway, you're following Armand. He goes around. He talks to where Van Gogh died. He goes to that inn and talks to the girl, and then he goes to the doctor that Van Gogh stayed with. Which there's this painting. There's a portrait of that doctor.
Of the one from the Game of Thrones guy?
Yeah, the Game of Thrones guy.
Yeah, he's like leaning over like that.
That is the highest, if I remember correctly, that painting is the highest auctioned painting of all time. Of that doctor.
Interesting.
Now, there are 3 different versions of that, I believe, because Van Gogh painted different
Oh, yeah.
But there's one particularly that goes in history as the highest bidded auction at art auction. So that was interesting. And I loved it because they made it so obvious when they, in the film, when they introduced him, they had
He's in that pose.
That was great.
And that's the thing. Like, there's all these, when they do all these establishing shots, it's basically his,
it's great.
painting. Like, the girl that's in the piano.
Yeah.
And I was watching a video of this, like, a couple of days before we went and saw the movie, about how they had to alter a few of the paintings where, like, the girl on the piano, it's a very vertical painting. They had to add detail on the side. And they were saying how there's a few scenes that they had to go through. I think there's the one where he's standing, Armand's standing at, like, the pier or something next to the ocean. They actually had to change the color palette because it was supposed to be a different time of year.
Time of day or something. Oh, yeah, time of day.
And they said I think the scene where
there's
Armand...
Like night and day ones, too.
Yeah, like where Armand and his dad are walking through that park or whatever. It's Van Gogh painted it during the day, so they had to make it during night.
So again, that's fascinating that the painters are able to replicate
the style, but still change the tone of it. And that's what they were saying is like they need to make changes to make the story make sense, but still trying to keep it accurate. Which, I mean, good on them. I mean, I wouldn't have known the difference anyway. But
well, so this film started out as a short film, and by this woman who started it, and because she was going through horrible depression and having suicidal thoughts, and she discovered the Dear Theo book,
right,
and started reading it, and she immediately felt a connection to Van Gogh, and like she visited his grave and all this, and she was like, man, this changed my life, this saved my life, so she wanted to do a homage to Van Gogh. So it started as a short project, and I don't know, I guess it just
kind of just took off.
Got enough, back up, and so it's gorgeous. It's really cool.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know how more to praise it. I mean, so it was so funny because I told my students, I teach some in the 8th grade, and art, and we did a Van Gogh unit, and I was showing them clips of this movie because this was before it came out, so I was showing them like the preview and stuff. So then when I went and saw it, I came the next day and I said, guess what I saw? I went and saw the Van Gogh movie. And they were like, oh, how was it? And I was like, it was amazing. And my one student goes, now, Miss Elbertson, was it really amazing? Or are you just saying that because it was Van Gogh? Like, such a smart ass, but I loved it.
Yeah.
No, so I'm not just saying that because it's Van Gogh. I mean,
yeah.
I think if it was shot in live action and released, it would still have been an interesting movie because it's interesting.
But yeah, I agree. I think it'd still be interesting were it live action, but I think it kind of gives it an extra sense of weight by trying to replicate his painting style. So. And I do want to give credit to this movie where it is a kind of a murder mystery, kind of trying to explain his death, but they still don't give you a concrete answer by the end.
Yeah, because no one knows.
Because I mean, they think he could have killed himself like that, or
they think maybe people were bullying him.
Well, there was this one guy, he said, like, because I guess Van Gogh hung out with a bunch of teenagers, and they think one of them was particularly mean to him, and he might have been the one that shot him. Yeah. And I mean, I like the whole...
all kinds of theories.
And I like that whole scene where Armand actually goes out to the field where he shot himself. It was like recreating the whole scene. He's like, okay, how could have this have worked?
Yeah.
He's like rolling around the field.
Pokes himself with a stick.
Yeah, like, it's like, how could have this, I love work?
That. So I don't know if there are historical accounts of Armand actually
doing this.
I don't know. I mean, I could certainly Google it.
Right.
I don't know how much of this is fictional and how much.
I think a lot of it is.
Yeah. So I don't know why they chose Armand. I don't know why. That,
I think he just kind of looked like he'd make a very
good.
I mean, he's got like that hat and his very yellow suit.
Yeah.
And so he looks like he'd make a good protagonist.
He'd be a good main character.
But yeah, so all in all, I think this movie's really well made.
There's a lot of mystery. There's a lot of like who's and what's and whys, and a lot of guilt people have, and
yeah. I mean, I even like that whole scene where he's going to visit the doctor towards the end. And the doctor pretty much says like, no, he's pretty much responsible for him killing himself because he like untreated him and all that stuff.
Well, because they were talking about how the doctor really wanted to be an artist and couldn't ever. He just didn't have the.
Yeah, because he was basically jealous of what he could do.
So he was really jealous of Van Gogh. So as a doctor, it was hard for him to treat someone he was very jealous of, and he acknowledged that he was trying. He wasn't much of a doctor as he was a peer to Van Gogh.
Yeah,
and that doesn't really work out in that situation. So he felt a lot of guilt for that because he felt that he didn't appropriately help Van Gogh.
Right. And
then, of course, his daughter felt a lot of guilt because she and Van Gogh were friends, and then she stopped hanging out with Van Gogh, and there's just all kinds of...
Yeah, it almost feels like everyone in this movie feels a little guilty about, like, okay, what could I have done to prevent this, or, like, what did I do to push him further towards it? So, I mean, just everyone's motivation and, like, what they think happened and all that stuff is very interesting to get, like, multiple perspectives of the same story.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I've heard different things about, Van Gogh's paintings and who he painted and why, and,
Right.
So, and one of the main things was because Van Gogh was so poor, he couldn't afford, models to paint.
Yeah, so he just painted...
So he painted himself.
Yeah, that's why,
that's why there's so many self-portraits of him.
You use what you got, I guess.
Or why he painted just his friends or the people that were around.
Yeah.
So it's safe to say that these people were close to him.
Yeah.
But
this
is a very passionate film.
Yeah, I think just by the fact that they chose to oil paint an entire movie like that really shows how passionate everyone in this movie was.
And oil paint is very
a pain in the ass.
tricky. It's not very forgiving because whereas acrylic paint dries very quickly and you can paint on top of it, oil paint takes like a week to dry completely.
Yeah, so you better know what you're doing.
So yeah, you need to. Well, and not only that, but like Van Gogh himself, he just globbed paint on. He just like slapped it on.
Oh yeah,
and he was a quick painter.
Yeah, and you can even see that because like you can see just like the thick.
If you look up pictures of like Starry Night and stuff. And there's pictures of it, like, laying down on the side, so you can see, like, how much it juts out. And how the texture of it.
I mean, even this movie, like, a lot of the scenes are like that, where you can see just how thick the paint is. So, yeah, I mean, this movie's definitely made by people who were inspired by Van Gogh, by people who are passionate about Van Gogh and stuff, so...
So I will say that, like, being an art teacher, I've learned a fuck ton about Van Gogh that I hadn't learned before teaching art. Because, you do Van Gogh lessons. So if I had gone into this movie, say, like 5 years ago, gone in and saw this movie, I'd be like, I don't understand what's going on. Because it really is very smart. It's very clever. You really have to know who Van Gogh is. Like,
right. And I mean, I don't know as much about Van Gogh. I know most of what I know because of you, because you tell me stuff. So I probably didn't appreciate this movie nearly as much as you did. I can appreciate it on an artistic level and from a storytelling perspective. I'm sure there's a lot of like the references to paintings that you got that I didn't get because I only got like the very well-known ones.
Yeah.
And what I'd seen in the previews before.
And another thing I loved is that they didn't just blow the fuck out of the Starry Night.
Starry Night, I think they showed like once.
They showed like at the very beginning.
Yeah, and that's it.
Credit rolls. But yeah, that was it. Yeah, so I was grateful for that because
that's the one everyone knows.
And I love that painting, don't get me wrong, but
yeah, it's
so
great.
Many other ones.
But yeah, he's got so many other ones, and I think they were saying they referenced over like 100 of his paintings. So I mean,
oh my gosh.
every scene is a reference.
He in his life painted, well, in just the 10 years, he started painting when he was like 27, and he died at like 37. So he was only painting for like 10 years. And in that time, he painted over 1,000 paintings.
I mean,
that equals out to like 3 paintings a week.
Yeah.
Which, holy crap.
It's more than I get. It's more than I get done.
But then he lost like 500 paintings in a fire. Because he worked in this little shed, and the shed caught fire.
Right.
So he lost even more of them. So who knows how many more we could have like seen.
Yeah.
So.
And I guess like kind of in the vein of that, I thought it was interesting the point they brought up that after Van Gogh's death, and again I don't know if this is actually what happened in history, but the doctor was going through after his funeral just taking his paintings and passing it off as his own.
The doctor was making. I thought he just wanted them all. Like,
was that what it is?
Yeah, I think he just.
I thought he said that like he was.
I think he was replicating them. Like,
he was like making. He was making replicas, and it's been taking historians a long time to figure out whose is whose. I think that's what they were saying in the credits, at least.
That more. But I know that his sister-in-law Theo's wife. For the most part, took most of his paintings. Yeah. And she's the one who gathered all the letters and stuff. She gathered all the letters. And, because she was doing it because she knew how much Theo loved Vincent. Right. And, Theo died. Yeah, Theo died about a year after. Apparently he had, syphilis, they said? I think so. Gosh. Yeah, I think he died of syphilis, I think. So, I didn't know that. Yeah. I didn't realize Theo had died that soon after Van Gogh. Well, I mean, they were even saying that he was pretty heartbroken after he died, so, I mean, it probably wasn't that great of a emotional thing anyway. So that's effing sad. And then, so his sister-in-law was the one who basically, and she, worked her butt off. She wanted Vincent to have a name. She took his work to galleries, and she, worked really hard and gave him a name, and that's one of the reasons people think he's so famous now is because of all the work she did. Yeah, so that's awesome. Good for her. Good for her. Would you do that for your sister-in-laws? Sure. Why not? If that's what they wanted. Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, if you have a chance to go see this movie, please do. I know it's slowly trickling out in the theaters over the country. I think ours might still have it. Last week they still had it. Yeah, it's too bad that it's not being more. I mean, it's technically still a small film, so it's not going to get a wide release. I'm sure it'll be on DVD by the end of the year, if not early next year. But if you do have an opportunity to go see this in the theaters, please do, because I think you're only going to really get the sense of, how much work they put in that, being able to see all the brushstrokes, seeing it on a big screen like that. It's incredible. So yeah. So I think all I could say is good job to everyone involved. Yeah, and then on that note, there's a website that officially sells, not that I'm promoting it, but it's called Fine Art America, and they are the official partner to the film, so you can go on and buy prints from the movie and stuff. So and I think they're all sold out now, but you could have bought the actual painted frames from this movie. Been, the tits. That would be amazing to own one of those. I mean, there were hundreds of dollars. Yeah. I mean, obviously because but I'm sure there were thousands of dollars. Right, but thousands of frames like that. Yeah, would have been interesting to see. But yeah, so please go check out this film. It's very beautifully done. It's very. I mean, obviously everyone involved in it really put a lot of effort into it. So, definitely. Yeah, go see it, please. So yeah, it's good to support, especially these smaller films. Mm-hmm. And if the Academy doesn't recognize this in some form this year, I'm gonna throw a fit. Seriously. I can't even. It's so good. People think animation is Disney and shit, so obviously the Disney movies are gonna be nominated. But then when you see something powerful like this being created, yeah, it really shows you what all you can do with animation. Animation isn't just
isn't just silly
fart
cartoons.
jokes, like,
It can be art.
yeah, actual legit
art.
Legit art. Like,
You hang on a wall.
yeah.
So yeah, I think that does us for this week. Thanks everyone for listening. And again, go see this movie. Check your local indie houses. Maybe they have it.
Maybe.
Or check their website. And they have all the listings for like when everyone's getting it. But yeah, so thanks for listening, and we'll catch everybody all next week.
Yay!
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Ink and Paint Club podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you can catch a new episode every week. Also be sure to follow us on our Facebook and Twitter so you can keep up with the show. Links are in the description. We'll see you next week.